A very good evening to everyone. On behalf of SEF CRNTS, it is my honor to welcome you all to the second talk of our webinar series on electron microscopy. To begin with, I would like to give you an overview of our SEF department. It was inaugurated by our late ex-Prime Minister Shri Morarji Ranchhodji Desai. The Department of Science and Technology, DST, has set up sophisticated analytical instruments facility in different parts of the country. The main objective of setting up these facilities is to provide guidance in acquisition of data using sophisticated instruments. SEF IIT Bombay has several analytical instruments and provides measurement services to in-house IIT B users and also to users from other colleges, universities, national laboratories, and industry. Professor Anil Cotton Tarail is currently heading our SEF CRNTS department. The current slide shows all our sophisticated instruments funded by DST. We have electron microscopes and they are highlighted in different color. This current slide shows us two more of our electron microscopes which are funded by the central facility. Here is an image of all our sophisticated transmission electron microscopes homed in SEF department. We have created a LinkedIn account for SEF IIT Bombay. We would be happy to associate with you through this account also. A brochure for the series of webinars have been uploaded in this LinkedIn account. This slide shows our team at SEF CRNTS. We all will be happy to welcome you at SEF and help you with your sample analysis. I would like to now welcome Professor Leela Srinivas Panchakarla, who would be giving a talk on transmission electron microscopy, imaging and spectroscopy. Professor Leela is an assistant professor at the Department of Chemistry, IIT Bombay. He has completed his doctoral in materials research from Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, JNCASR, Bengaluru in 2011 and performed his postdoctoral research at Virginia Commonwealth University, USA and Weizmann Institute of Science, Israel for a couple of years. His primary area of research includes low-dimensional materials for energy conversion, self-assembly of nanostructures, structures on nanoscale metastable compounds. Amongst his recent recognitions, he has been awarded with the Young Scientist Award 2019 at the Chemical Frontiers Conference in Goa. We welcome you, sir, to this webinar series. We are sure that this talk will enlighten the knowledge of the upcoming researchers in the field of electron microscopy. I would take a moment to request the participants to share your feedback. The link for the same will be posted at the time of question and answer session. If you have any questions related to the subject, please type it in the question and answer section. Please mention your name before the question. We will try to take up your question at the end of the talk. Leela, sir, may I now request you to start your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Let me begin by thanking Professor Anil, Head CRNTS, and all the microscope people for organizing these webinars and invite me for this one. So today I will discuss about transmission electron microscope of basic functions and how electrons can be used effectively to image and do spectroscopy. I will also discuss a little bit about sample preparation at the end. The one what you are seeing on your right, just a second, is a typical transmission electron microscope. This is this one particularly, this 300 kV TEM, which is at IIT Bombay site facility. So imaging materials with electrons all started in mid 1920s when de Broglie postulated, matter also can be like a waves. Till that time, only electromagnetic radiation, people thought it has a dual nature, means it can have both wave as well as particle. But this, wave particle duality, de Broglie asked a question, why it has to be there only for the light? Why can't matter have wave nature? And this postulation, and he determined what is the lambda, means wavelength of the particular matter. And immediately after this postulation, Davidson and Germer, they have experimentally proved, in fact, your electrons can diffract because that is the wave nature. They have used single crystal nickel to see diffraction pattern, and they identified the wavelength of electrons. So this news, as big news, it has come out everywhere. And there's a young scientist, Ruska, at the time is a young PhD student. So he's in the Germany. So he heard about this and he thought, why can't we use the electrons to image? So he was working on magnetic coils for electron lenses. And then he built the first electron microscope in 1933. So this is the one of the earliest electron microscope. And later in his career, he has worked on electron lenses and eventually got a Nobel Prize in 1986. And he shared the Nobel Prize with the other gentlemen, Binnig and Henrik. So they are the one who invented scanning tunneling microscope as well as atomic force microscope. Before we go to the TEM, let's see what happens when electrons interact with matter. So in the previous webinar, we have already seen this slide, but let me just illustrate again in terms of transmission electron microscope. So when instant beam hits your sample, there are many things happens. So we can get the secondary electrons coming from your material itself, or the primary electrons can backscatter, and we can also get X-rays, and all these things basically we image these electrons in scanning electron microscope. But these electrons can also do, it can transmit through your sample, and while doing that, some of the electrons get elastically scattered and we get electron diffraction, and some of them are inelastically scattered. It means it loses some of its energy, and we can use that electrons to identify what are the elements present in your sample. So all these transmitted things, we can use TEM to detect that one and do both imaging as well as spectroscopy. Well, in that time, 1960, Feynman famously said, it is very easy to identify what kind of elements present in a given substance. But the problem is, all one would have to do would be to look at it and see where the atoms are. So he actually quoted, so electron microscopes are not really that powerful at that time, but he would have been very happy to see the latest developments in this field. But the resolution itself actually depends upon your wavelength of your light or electron. So basically, resolution is the shortest distance that can be distinguished between 2 points. In this particular slide, you can see these 2 spots can be seen as the 2 different spots. This is the resolved image, but in this case, it is not. So your resolution basically depends upon your wavelength and numerical aperture. Your n is refractive index and alpha is semi-angle objective aperture. Well, you cannot play too much with your numerical aperture. Rather, one can tune lambda, and we can go to very, very small wavelengths. But if you use light, in the light microscope, the best resolutions we can get is about 200 or 150 when you use something like 400 nanometer visible light. But that is not good enough to do atomic resolutions. But rather, one can use electrons which have a very short wavelengths. So these slides will give you how to calculate a wavelength of electron and how electron wavelength changes with accelerating voltage. If let's say if we have an electron accelerated with high voltages, it has high kinetic energy, and even if we have a high kinetic energy, the electrons have a short wavelengths. So you can actually do yourself a little bit of calculation and find out what is the wavelengths of electrons at different acceleration voltages. Keep it in mind because the velocities of electrons are extremely high at these high voltages. So it is very close to speed of light. So you have to incorporate relativistic effects while doing this calculation. So if you accelerate your electrons with about 100 kV, so you get wavelength of electrons is about 3.7 picometer. And if you do it with 300, it is close to 2 picometer. So resolution of this one is about 1 picometer, close to. But so wavelength is 2 picometer. So in principle, actually you can able to get very high resolution images using electrons. But in reality, we don't really see high resolutions using this one. The reason for that is aberrations. There are many aberrations in TEM, and some of the important ones which are very serious, which limits your resolution, are spherical and chromatic aberrations. So if we have a spherical aberration, of course, if we have a round lenses, you can't avoid that. And electrons bend at different places at different, for example, electron bends from the edges very steeply compared to the close to the optical axis. So instead of getting a focused point, you get a disk. So it limits your resolution. Another, of course, one can actually correct it. User cannot do that one, but you need to buy a new instrument, aberration corrected instrument. Of course, that costs a fortune. Well, another aberration is a chromatic aberration. As the name suggests, so we have a different wavelengths when the electrons come out from the source, and also because of the instability of your lenses also contributes to chromatic aberration. And different wavelength of electrons bends differently, so that gives a disk instead of a sharp point. Remember, it is a very the variation what you are seeing is 1 ppm, is very small. It is like about 0.1 electron volt when you are using 100 kilovolt electrons. So but we are using it very high magnifications, right? So there even small variation can disturbs your resolutions. And you make sure your samples are very thin, otherwise that also contributes to your chromatic aberration. And another one is stigmatism. So it's basically the ununiform electromagnetic field around your optical axis. This is called, microscope's worst enemy, because while imaging, time to time you will see this stigmatism. And of course, the good thing is user can correct it. So in this particular thing, you can see here the vertical lines are blurred. In this case, horizontal lines are blurred. So you would have seen while imaging your TEM, you would have seen the FFT images. So this is the we have stigmatism here. So one can use corrections in x-axis and y-axis to make it as spherical as possible to correct the stigmatism. So typical TEMs operate from 80 kV to 300 kV. And of course, we have a top-notch TEMs which can operate at 1 megavolt, but it's a very costly instrument. So here we can go to very high magnifications. 1 million x magnification we can go, but only magnification doesn't give you a good image. So we need to also have a high resolutions. So in microscopes like this also gives atomic resolutions. If you are using something like 300 kV, you will get point-to-point resolution of about 2 angstroms. Remember, so electrons interact with your samples. So sample has to be as thin as possible so that electron can transmit through this one. And electron also interacts with the air molecule. So it has to have high vacuums in your microscopes. So the transmit electrons, when you image it, remember you are getting a 2D image from 3D samples. So then the interpretation has to be very careful. You might see some artifacts. Then while you have electrons imaged, you can get both images, diffraction, and also one can use this one for spectroscopy. We can use both organic and inorganic materials or biological samples to do your TEM sample. So in the TEM, what you have basically is electron gun sitting right at the top, and we have many lenses, a condenser lens, and we have objective lens and projector lens and some of the intermediate lens, and also we have some apertures. So and you keep your sample right here. Okay, this is a goniometer and you insert your sample here. The function of any lens is to focus the beam and also to magnify the image. And a function of a aperture is a basically small pinhole where electron can pass through. The function of an aperture is to allow electrons, certain electrons of your interest, and block rest of the things. By sensitively controlling your apertures, one can actually get high resolutions as well as high contrast. So we have one slide to demonstrate that one. Okay, so we have seen different kind of electron sources and electron sources in the last webinar, so we will not talk too much about it. But in the case of TEM, the most important thing is when you are doing it very high magnification, your brightness becomes very important. So we need to use the electron sources which gives high brightness. So generally, field emission guns are much better compared to thermionic emission. So basically what you do is you knock it out electron from your filament either by heating it, by sending a current, or you can use your potential and you can knock it out the electron by tunneling. Then you can use another anode to accelerate that electrons. And if you have a field emission gun like that, they're very sharp tips compared to thermionic emission. And field emission also have, energy spread is very small. So it is very important to do the high resolution imaging. And the lenses what we have basically is electromagnetic lenses. So it's basically a copper wire in a spiral fashion. And when electron goes through that one and it spirally, it will come down and we can focus the electrons wherever you want. And one slide about detectors. There are different kind of detectors. The popular ones are CCD, charge coupled device one. Of course, your screen itself you can use as a detector to see your images. Is basically a fluorescent doped zinc sulfide. When electron hit your fluorescent screen and you can see the images. Earlier people are using, of course, these silver halide based films, but they are not using anymore. But the most popular ones are CCD. The one what we use also CCD, and we also have a top-notch something like CMOS detectors. These complementary metal organic semiconductor detectors. The operation principle is similar, except the fact that in the CCD, the electrons collected in the each pixels will travel in one column, and that will be converted into the voltage and amplified, and this signal further converted into digital image. But in the CMOS, so you collect electron by electron in the pixel itself by using field effect transistors. So because you are collecting separately, so processing speed is very high and also operates at low power. So let's see what TEM can do. So this is the typical TEM. So this is the TEM grid where you deposit your sample. This is about 3 millimeter diameter, having a very thin amorphous carbon coating or polymer coating where you deposit your sample. Then you load it inside and you illuminate with your electrons and you see using your screen or the detector. You get bright field images like that. This is one inorganic nanoscroll. You can see low magnification image, or you can also do high magnification imaging and see lattice planes, or you can also do this one in the dark field. In this particular case, what we are using is high angle angular dark field image, and we can see contrast and you can correlate that one with your lattice structure. Other than imaging, one can also do spectroscopy. In this case, energy dispersive X-ray analysis or energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. What it basically gives, we basically analyze your X-rays, what is produced in your sample, and we find out what are the chemistry and what are the elements are present. It's not only gives elemental amount, but also it gives you where they are coming from. So spatial distribution also can be found out. So we can also use electron energy loss spectroscopy. So here, when electrons interact with your samples, it does some jobs in your sample. Because of that, it loses some energy. The loss of energy can be found out, and we can be detected here. And you can have a yields detector, and you collect and find out what are the elements. And also, yields can do spatial distribution. So we can generally TMs we can image in a bright field mode or a dark field mode. Basically, when you do bright field mode, you collect transmitted electrons and image them. Then your background field is more brighter than your sample. Or we can also do that one in a dark field mode. In this case, what we do is the diffracted electrons are collected and imaged. You would have seen here the same sample at the same place, same region, the contrast is inverted. Background is black in this case and your sample looks white because you are collecting diffracted images. In the case of high resolution transmission electron microscope, what we get is we can also get the information of lattice spacings and atomic columns. And in the case we use bigger objective apertures. So we'll go one by one. But to see anything, we need to have a contrast. Otherwise, everything looks very plain. So in the contrast, there are many definitions, and the most relevant one here is the contrast is a ratio, difference between the intensity between two spots divided by the intensity. So they have an amplitude contrast, for example, mass thickness contrast and diffraction contrast. In the mass thickness contrast means when the electrons pass through your sample, it gets scattered. And if you have a sample, the scattering is very high compared to your background. Then wherever the scattering is there, then you see that is as a black, more darker. So these are incoherent scattering. But if you have a crystalline materials, what you see is a diffraction contrast. When the electrons satisfy your Bragg's condition and get diffracted, for example, if you have it, so we can use this diffraction contrast to study dislocation in your material. For example, in this case, let's say if we have a crystalline materials of having a planes, and if you have a defect somewhere here, and your electrons get scattered more here compared to here, then it looks more darker. Now one can actually use objective aperture and you block this region, these electrons, and you can enhance significantly the contrast. This is the diffraction contrast. But when you do high resolution transmission electron microscope, what you get is a phase contrast. So this is the one typical HRTM image of atomic columns you can see here. So basically what we do is when sample passes through your, when electron passes through your sample, it shifts its phase, and along with that they travel different distances before getting focused. So that also contributes to another phase shift. And these transmitted electrons and diffracted electrons together they interfere and forms the phase contrast image. Okay, so here one important thing to note is if you are looking at the bright spot or the dark spot, we can't really say atomic column is the bright spot or dark spot because it's a little complicated. So it depends upon, of course, contrast transfer function. The way you can understand is if you look at the contrast transfer function, the y-axis is the contrast and x-axis is the frequency. And your contrast transfer function depends upon your spherical aberration as well as a function of defocus. So if you change the focus, you can see. So for example, here we have a negative contrast. So if you change the defocus, you can see the contrast is decreasing. So you would have seen in the FFT. So the contrast can be changed by changing the defocus. So your negative contrast becomes positive and it oscillates. So one has to be very careful. So we can't directly correlate your contrast to in your lattice. Rather, we can do that one using scanning tunneling microscope. For example, in scanning transmission electron microscope. Pardon me. So in the scanning transmission electron microscope, what we basically do, so we can have a scanning coils to scan. So basically we have electrons, focused beam of electrons on your sample. You can use scanning coils to scan the your sample across with electrons. while doing that, so this electrons, if you collect it here at the center, you can get the bright field, or you can collect it somewhere here. Your detector can be here and you can get angular bright field, or somewhere here where you can get angular dark field, or you can also image this one, collect these electrons at way away, higher angles. Then you will get, something called high angle angular dark field. Okay, so the scattering of an electron depends upon atomic number. So if higher the atomic number, scattering is very high. So then we will get, what we get basically produced is a jet contrast. Okay, so let's take one example and demonstrate this one. For example, if we have a lanthanum sulfide is a doublet in this, and these doublets are sandwiched between chromium disulfide layers, and we know lanthanum is high atomic number compared to your chromium. So these doublets, whatever you are seeing, high intensity doublets are coming from lanthanum. This can directly correlate, and the low intensity regions are coming from chromium disulfide. So here we can directly correlate because your scattering depends upon atomic number, but that is not the true in the case of a normal TEM. Okay. All right. So this slide is meant for the young operators. So also, of course, users. When you are doing your samples, the first thing, very important thing is, so you need to know what exactly what kind of information you are planning to achieve in your sample. For example, your interest is like in a biological samples where contrast is more important than your resolution. So we can actually opt for low resolution RAW KV TEMs, and then you can play a little bit with your condenser apertures and spot size. And if you want to get high resolution images, for example, if you want to image a nanoparticle or a nanotube or so on, where you want to image that one at very, very high resolutions. So there you can use high KV electron microscopes, and you can also play with your apertures and spot size to get the best possible results. For example, let's say if you are using high voltage TEM, so of course it increases your brightness and increases your resolution because your wavelengths are shorter, and thicker samples also can be imaged, and but the only thing is it reduces contrast. Remember, contrast is a ratio. And if you are using condenser aperture, so if you are using a smaller condenser aperture, so it increases resolution and decreases beam damage, and also decreases brightness because you are blocking some of the electrons. But if you are using objective aperture, so objective aperture is the one which is just below your sample. So if you use the smaller one, so it increases the contrast and decreases the brightness. Okay, so one can also play with the spot size, and if you have a smaller spot size, basically current is low, so it increases the resolution and decreases brightness, and importantly it also decreases beam damage to your sample. Remember, so for example, let's take one example and comprehend this slide. Let's say your interest is to look at very beam sensitive sample, but you want to do it at very, very high resolution. For example, let's take asbestos nanotubes. So this is basically a magnesium aluminum silicate where you want to see lattice planes in your nanotube, but it is extremely beam sensitive. If you focus your specimen for a few seconds, it will damage. So you will not get any high resolution image. But how do you do it? Because you want to get high resolution, we can use high KV microscope, something like that. But we can use higher spot size. When you use higher spot size, then what basically happens, current is reduced and beam damage is reduced. Okay, so one can play with this one to get what you want. Okay. So far we have seen how to image your samples. Let's look into the spectroscopy. So when your electrons interact with your samples, it produces some X-rays, and you can use that X-rays and you can find out what are the elements present, because X-rays, whatever generated from your sample, is very characteristic to the elements present. So we can do your spectroscopy and find out what are the elements present. Or when the electrons interact with your samples, it loses some energy of your electrons. That that energy loss electrons can be collected at the bottom of your TEM, and it can be analyzed with yields detector, and also one can find out what kind of elements are present. So here if you want to do yields, it is better use the thin samples. So here if you use EDS, so lateral resolutions are very good, and also in the case of yields they're very good. But so remember, there is no depth resolution in both the cases, because in the yields electrons are passing from top to bottom, so we will not really see where the electrons are really losing the this energy. Same with the EDS, though you have an EDS detector at the top, but your interaction volume of electrons with the sample is very high. You are talking a few microns, and X-rays can travel within your samples in few microns. So detection what you are getting is from the not only top layer, also from about a micron or more than a micron. Okay, so we don't get any resolution. But good thing is we can get we can detect even the small minute doping in your samples using EDS and as well as yields. So let's look at one by one. In the case of EDS, energy dispersed spectroscopy, what basically happens, remember electrons also they are particles, not only waves. So electrons can hit, interact with one of the electrons in your atom and knock it out that electrons and creates a hole. And of course that is not stable, and the electrons in the higher orbitals will jump there, and the difference between these quantized energy levels comes out as X-rays, and this X-rays can be analyzed with EDS. And the way we do nomenclature is the electrons are falling into K shell, we call K, and depends upon where they're falling, either we call their K alpha and K beta. For electrons, the hole is created in the L shell, and electrons are falling from top, then we call L lines, and so on. And these energy levels are very characteristic to each element, so we can easily find out what kind of elements present in your sample. So let's take one example. So in EDS, it's not only just elemental information, but it also gives, for example, this is a calcium cobalt oxide nanotube. It also gives where these particular elements are coming from. For example, this is the nanotube, and I want to find out, are they really nicely uniformly distributed entire the nanotubes, or they are phase separated? So I have a calcium cobalt and oxide. As you can see, the signals are coming more from your sample, and they are very nicely distributed, so one can easily find out. So they're uniformly distributed entire your sample. Okay. But in the case of electron energy loss spectroscopy, because electrons, when they interact with your samples, loses some of the energy, and now electrons have a different energy, so one can use magnetic prism to spread that energy, different energy electrons, and you can use your detector to find out what are the losses on the process. So yields have a higher resolution, spectral resolution, compared to EDS. So if you look at, let's say this is a typical yield spectrum. Y-axis is counts and x-axis is loss, energy loss. Here, look at, this is what we are talking about, electron volt. Okay, I forgot to mention in the previous slide what we are talking about, kilo electron volt. Okay, resolutions in EDS is not really good. We are talking here something like 150 to 200 kV spectral resolutions. On the other hand, here we are talking about 1 electron volt. So if you have best microscope, you can have about 1 electron volt spectral resolution. But one can use, of course, monochromators can improve this resolution. It is very good for the low atomic number samples. Of course, you can get elemental information, but also we can get in many other functions. For example, you can find out the band gap, and we can also find out the bonding information, and also one can get nearest neighbor atomic structure and so on. So one has to use very thin samples in this case. Let's take one example. In this case, graphite and fullerene and diamond has been imaged. These are all allotropes of carbon. But graphite and fullerenes, we have a pi bonds. In the diamond, we have only sp3 bonds. This information can be found out by using yields. For example, we have a transition of this particular case. The pi electrons are only possible in the graphite and C60. That signals we can see here, but diamond that is missing. So this kind of fine features we can find out with yields. A typical yield spectrum looks something like that. Here what we have, so in the y-axis is the log scale and x-axis is energy loss. In the energy loss, what we have is a low energy loss region, about 50 electron volts or so. Less than that we call low energy loss, and we have a high energy loss regions. What you see in the spectrum is the first line is the zero loss, meaning the electrons didn't do any job in your material, so it didn't lose any energy. Also we have a plasmons. We can get the plasmon information. The plasmon is basically a collective oscillation of surface electrons in your sample. And the high energy region, then you can find out what are the elements present. So for example, in this particular sample you have a nickel and you have oxygen in the sample. For example, oxygen binding energy of 1s electron binding energy of oxygen is around 532. So there we can see that particular peak. From there you can find out what are the elements present. So these are a couple of examples I have given to understand this one. So in this first case, it is a boron doped graphene sample. The interest here is to find out whether boron is doped in the graphene or is the phase separated, are they uniformly doped or not. So here we have carbon mapping here on graphene sample and also boron doped boron mapping. You can clearly see wherever carbon is there, boron also there. And actually here the amount is about 3 atomic percentage compared to carbon. Here, but still you can see the nice signals, and the boron is uniformly distributed entire your graphene sample. So we can clearly find out it's not a phase separated, it's a dope. And also one can use yields in using aberration corrected microscope. This is one example where the user's interest here is to find out your cobalt, calcium and oxygen in your sample. Here they have started with cobalt oxide layer, COO2 layer sandwiched between calcium cobalt oxide. This is calcium. The blue color is cobalt and red color is oxygen. When they did the chemical treatment and they have selectively leached out some of the calcium from the sample, but now they want to find out what are the elements being leached and how they are arranged. So in this case, you can see here 3 atom thick and here only 2 atom thick, means one of the calcium layer is came out. So one can use yields to find out that. We can do the spectroscopy and find out what are how much elements are there, and one can do atomic resolution. In this particular case, they have done line by line mapping and found out. So here we have a cobalt oxide layers there, and the red color what they are coming from is from calcium, and calcium is only present just below the first cobalt oxide layer and it's not present in the second layer. Okay, so blue color is represent in this case, the color coding is for the cobalt, and cobalt is present in the thick layer as well as just one layer above that. So one can get extremely sensitive information and very spatially resolved information using yields. So it's not just about getting images. All the images, even if you have a great microscope, but if you don't prepare your sample very well, you don't get a good image. So if you have a good sample, if you put, you will get a good images, and if you put a dirty sample, you get dirty images. Okay, so always remember, so you try to keep as thin samples as possible. So if you, for a normal TEM, you can use about 150 or less than that to get the normal TEM images. But if you want to do high resolution TEM image, so you try to use thin samples, less than 50 nanometer. Thinner is the better. So also you can actually choose your grids. So typical TEM grid looks something like that. You have a 3 millimeter diameter, and we have typically a copper grid. This is, and you have a vertical lines and a horizontal lines. These are all copper, and each grid box contains either amorphous formor layer. This is basically a polymer, or it can be coated with some carbon. So choose your grid according to the function what you want. So for example, you have a holy carbon grids where the carbon you can coat on top of it, and each grid box looks something like that, where we have a holes. And there is something called lazy carbon grid. They look something like that. So that depends upon your function you can use. For example, your interest is to image something like a very long nanotubes or nanorods, I prefer, lacy carbon grid, where, your nanorods or nanotubes can fall something like that, and you can image wherever the holes are there, and then you don't have any, back carbon contamination. You can also do the very clean spectroscopy with that. But if we have something like self-assembled monolayers or self-assembled nanoparticles, I rather prefer, wholly carbon grid, and you can image wherever the holes. So of course, when you coat your nanoparticles, it's covered entire your grid, but you can image wherever you want. You can image in the holes so that you can avoid your carbon. But the routine purpose, day-to-day purpose, you can use, of course, polymer coated TEM grids. And also grids not only with the copper, also it comes with the nickel, molybdenum, and gold. And for example, if you want to use, let's say, your sample contains some copper, and if you want to do spectroscopy, and you don't want to, use copper-based grid because your sample also contains copper. Rather, one can choose nickel or gold or molybdenum. So sample preparation, but if we have a powder sample, it's pretty straightforward. So what we can do is you take your samples, powder samples, and you disperse in pure solvents like ethanol or isopropanol, and you just sonicate it and drop cast on your TEM grid, and the excess solvent can be sucked out with your tissue paper, and make sure you dry them. So you can put under IR lamp, or you can heat it at 80 degrees Celsius for a few minutes. Then you can load, in your TEM, and you can image it. So while doing this, remember, don't use acetone, that is very dirty, and also try to avoid high boiling solvents. Okay. So if you use, high boiling solvents or acetone, then you have a lot of air gassing problem while doing imaging. And also it contaminates your TEM. Okay, so but if you have powder samples, they are pretty straightforward. But I have seen many questions people been asked. They asked me to cover for the nanoparticles. So I have included one slide. So if we have, let's say, nicely dispersed nanocrystals coated with surfactants, instead of just drop casting, I prefer this following procedure. So what one can do is you take your TEM grid, and you dip it into your sample, which is having a nanoparticles, nicely distributed nanoparticles. And while dipping, make sure you dip only about 1/3 of your TEM grid, and let capillary forces take over, and your grid would be covered with your solvent. Then you take it out, this one, and you dry it and image it. So while imaging, you image rest of the 2/3 of the portion. So then you will get a very nice small nanoparticles, almost uniform layered nanoparticles. That is one of the best way you can do it. Of course, there are other methods to do it, and this is quite popular method. What people do is you disperse your nanoparticles in low boiling solvents, and once you dissolve that one, you put one or two drops of that one on top of either water or diethylene glycol. So once this solvent is evaporated, hexane in this case, then it leaves the nanoparticles with a very uniform monolayer. And of course, we can actually keep on adding and get 2 layers and 3 layers and so on. But this method is very, very effective. While doing this, of course, you may have to optimize a little bit to get very well packed structures like this. So in this case, they want to make gold Fe3O4 nanoparticles self-assembly on this one. So they have used this particular procedure. So later, of course, they have removed one of the component and got the second component well dispersed. So remember, while doing this kind of etching experiments, so because of the strong capillary forces, they will agglomerate. So one way of preventing, the Uday Bhaskar and this team, they have done is carbon coating, so that carbon prevents them from moving. Okay. So these are the quite popular ways of preparing the TEM grids. But if you have a bulk samples or biological samples, completely different ball game. So if we have, let's say, bulk samples, one can use FIB, focused ion beam, that what you have seen in the last webinar, operated in the SCM. This is also called dual beam. So for example, if you want to image this bulk sample and this near the grain boundary, what you basically do is you you protect this one with some platinum layer, you deposit some platinum and trench it from both the sides in a U fashion. Then you take it out that portion with micro manipulator. Then of course you can further thin it down up to 100 nanometers or so. Then you can mount that one in a TEM grid and of course you can image it. Of course, but this is a expensive technique. But the traditional techniques to do bulk samples is basically you make them into a pellet and you cut them and polish them and punch them into 3 mm discs. And one can do electro polishing or electro polishing with ion milling. One can get electron transparent materials. So in this technique, basically you can do of course electro polishing. After that, we can use ion beam with some angle till you make a hole or something like that, and then very close to the hole you will have a very thin region where you can actually image it. And there are a lot of videos for the bulk samples cutting. I recommend you to go and watch if you are interested. I think with this, so what I have covered today is how to use electrons for basic imaging, and also how to do the spectroscopy and how to analyze that one. With that, I would like to thank my students. Some of them, like Konkana, prepared most of the samples, and Sushil and Vishal did the most of the microscope job. And thank you all for your attention. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening presentation. There are questions which the participants have in mind. How do you measure an amorphous sample using TM, and what information can be obtained?
Okay, so amorphous samples, for example, if we have, let's say, carbon nanoballs or amorphous silica, so we use TM to find out basically the sizes of the particular samples. Okay, so we don't really do high resolution TEM because you don't get a good phase contrast there. But one can find out, for example, pore size if we are interested in porous samples, or if you want to find out the size distribution, we can do that one with the mass thickness contrast. So amorphous samples generally are either porous samples or samples with some of the embedded nanoparticles. For example, some people embed, let's say, catalytic nanoparticles on amorphous carbon or SiO2. And if you want to see the size distribution of the nanoparticles on your amorphous carbon, one can image that one. I think mostly we use for that purpose.
So the next question is, why do we get astigmatism?
Stigmatism. So stigmatism is basically electromagnetic. Of course, not only electromagnetic, also you see that one in the optical microscope. So basically, stigmatism is a non-uniformity of your electromagnetic radiation around your optical axis. Okay, so but good thing about this one is one can correct it this one by just changing the current at different angles. So if it is not uniform, in a circular fashion, you get the stigmatism. Okay, so basically it is an ununiform electromagnetic field around your optical axis.
So the next question is, what kind of artifacts can one expect in TEM?
Okay,
can you give some specific examples?
Yeah, so it has been actually well demonstrated in many platforms. See, for example, let's say if we have 2 nanorods, I would have given one image, would have been nice, but anyway, if we have, let's say, 2 nanorods sitting one top of the other. Okay, so now electron beam is going through your sample, then you don't know whether it is 2 nanorods or 1 nanorod, right? That is one example. But if you look at something like a core shell structure, okay, so your core is, let's say, gold, and you coated with, let's say, SiO2, and when you do imaging, what you see is the very high contrast region at the center and low contrast region of your SiO2. But now you are not 100% sure whether your gold is inside or outside. Okay, in the SEM you can find out that, but you can't really find out with TEM. But rather one can do, smartly what one can do is one can tilt the sample holder and see from different angles. Okay, if it is sitting on top of your SiO2, then you will see, contrast is moving. But it is exactly at the core. When you image from any direction, your goal would be, seeing as, exactly at the center. So that is another example.
So the next question is, which device can give better measure of the phase change in metals? FEXM, TEM or XRD?
Come again, the resolution.
Yeah, phase change in metals, better measure of phase change in metals.
Okay, phase change in metal. Okay, fine. So XRD, so let me just demonstrate. So XRD, if you want to find out, let's say, phase change with respect to temperature, so that we can do in XRD easily. So we have a, temperature dependent XRD, you can do it and find out. But if you want to find out where the phase change is happening, or if you want to study the local structure while phase change, you cannot use, of course, XRD. You have to use the TEM for that matter. Okay, so of course not all TEMs are equipped with, temperature dependent holders. So one needs to find out, what we can rather do is maybe you can heat the samples maybe before the phase change and after the phase change, and then separately you can measure it. Okay, but the TEM, what it gives is the local information, but XRD is the more like a, statistical bulk information. Okay, so you need to choose your equipment, depends upon what really you are interested in. Okay.
Yes, sir. And the last question is, could you please define coherent and incoherent scattering?
Yeah, so coherent means, I think I have a, let me just show this one. Can you see my slides? Anyway, so doesn't matter. So coherent means, see, for example, let's say if you are doing diffraction, okay, all the electrons are having a same phase, then we call that is coherent. And when you have amorphous samples or something like that, electrons get scattered, in a different way. So that is called incoherent. So coherent should have a same phase. So if it is a same phase or same phase difference, then we call that is coherent. And if it is not, then we call incoherent. So basically coherent scattering gives diffraction, but incoherent scattering, it doesn't give diffraction.
Okay, sir. This was our last question. On behalf of CEF CRNTS, I would like to thank you, Professor Leela Srinivas Panchakarla, for the very insightful talk on TEM imaging and spectroscopy. We are really grateful to Professor Panchakarla for answering questions asked by the participants. I would also like to thank our head, Professor Anil Kotyan-Tharail, for his continued support in this webinar series. And last, I thank you all the participants for attending this webinar and making this event successful. A link for the feedback form is shared in the question and answer section. Please fill this form. Your valuable inputs are important for our further improvement. The registration link for our next webinar is now open on our website. The talk is on transmission electron microscopy diffraction by Professor Nityananda Prabhu from MEMS Department, IIT Bombay. I request you all to join us for our next talk. Once again, thank you all for making this webinar successful. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.